Women's March on Washington, as you know, is on track to be the largest demonstration ever in response to a presidential inauguration. I believe, and this is what I've done my research, the last inauguration that had a huge crowd was Nixon, and that was 60,000. So this is going to dwarf that for sure. As we look ahead to the next 14 days, and yes, it's just 14 days, it's crucial that we understand our First Amendment rights, our civil liberties, and communicating our messages during a demonstration. Here to help us today with that is the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU. The ACLU is the nation's foremost guardian of liberty, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to defending and protecting our individual rights and personal freedoms. Through advocacy, education, and litigation, their attorneys, advocates, and volunteers work to preserve and promote civil liberties, including the freedom of speech, the right of privacy, reproductive freedom, and equal treatment under the law. Let us now welcome Mary Catherine Roper, Deputy Legal Director with the ACLU of Pennsylvania.
As Alexander said, today I am here to talk to you about how you exercise your First Amendment rights. I understand that for some of you, this is your first march, your first political action. My presentation assumes that it will not be your last. So I am going to talk about how your rights will be exercised in 2 weeks on the 21st. But I also am going to talk more broadly about exercising your right to free speech. And I'll say now, and I'll say again at the end, the ACLU stands ready always to help activists plan to get their message out and get it out in the most effective way and get it out without running into problems with law enforcement. Call us. So let me start with a basic lesson, and I'll try not to get too wonky. Don't let your eyes cross over. I have some fun examples, so that'll keep you awake. All right. What does the First Amendment protect? The First Amendment protects your right to speak and your right to petition the government, a few other things not relevant to this discussion. It does not always protect your actions. Some actions, so let me talk a little bit. Everybody's familiar with the concept of protest and marching, and next week, or not next week, 2 weeks, you will be marching in a very well-organized event where there's a permit, where there's a clear route, where there's a clear plan, there's a clear rally. Kudos to the women who have done all that work for you. Follow their instructions, remember your bus number, and you will be fine. At other times, you may be part of smaller events, perhaps not as well-organized events, or events that are not as planned out in advance. And that is when you really need to understand sort of where the boundaries are of what you can do and what you can't do. You have, let me talk about a couple definitions here, some words you have heard already here today. One is direct action, and you've also heard the term civil disobedience. So many people are familiar with the concept of a march or picketing with a sign. That's pretty traditional free speech activity, and for the most part doesn't run into problems with law enforcement. I'll talk about that in a minute. But then there's a category that activists tend to call direct action. And that could mean a lot of different things. Direct action essentially is meant to disrupt. Sometimes that disruption is legal. Sometimes that disruption crosses over into the not legal. And just because and it is political disruption, it's disruption for a political reason. Just because it's done for a political reason does not suddenly make it protected by the First Amendment. First Amendment does not make, say, political vandalism, spray painting your views of the administration or its policies, etc., on government buildings, not suddenly legal because you're expressing your political views, right? Vandalism, still illegal. Destroying public property, still illegal. There is something called civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is when you intentionally break the law with the intent of getting caught in order to make a point. It is not the tagging of government property, right, and then running away and hiding. That's just illegal behavior. May indeed be political direct action, still, but it's not civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is when you're actually intending to get arrested, like the wonderful representatives from the NAACP. You need to be very clear, both for yourselves and in your planning groups, whether you're talking about breaking the law, and then whether you're talking about deliberately breaking the law and getting arrested in terms of civil disobedience, or whether you're trying to get away with something that is not protected by the First Amendment. I really recommend that if you're having any of those kinds of conversations, you reach out to an attorney for some advice. Not in a room of 300 people. No decent attorney will give you advice on civil disobedience or potentially illegal behavior in a non-secure, non-confidential place. I know you all love each other. This is not a confidential place. This is not a place for legal advice. So understand what we're talking about then when we talk about direct action can be legal or not. Civil disobedience, which is deliberately breaking the law to make a point. There are many things that can be done to be politically disruptive without risking arrest. And so but a lot of people think that something they're doing for a political reason is protected by the First Amendment. That's just not the case. So let me give you an example. Say they are debating something in your local city or county council that you have an opinion about, and you and a bunch of friends go, and you have made an agreement that you are going to, in an organized fashion, keep asking the same question repeatedly to make a point about what they're doing. That is disruptive, but as long as you're doing it within the rules of the meeting, it's perfectly legal. If instead what you all do is go and at random points in the meeting you interrupt the meeting process to stand up and demand answers to your question, one after another, you're not complying with the meeting process. You are disrupting the meeting. They can remove you, because that's not something the First Amendment gives you a right to do. You've heard me mention over and over again law enforcement. Here's sort of a really fundamental concept that a lot of people forget sometimes. The First Amendment only constrains the government. It does not constrain private actors. It does not constrain your employers from reacting against things that you have said. You're your private employers. There's very few contexts in which a private employment situation you have protection for the things you say, for your political views. It doesn't I like to explain to teenagers the First Amendment does not keep your parents from punishing you from speaking out about things. It doesn't prevent your neighbors from yelling at you, right? It does not protect you from criticism or response from non-government actors. So there's still, despite the fact that you have a First Amendment right to speak your views, when you are dealing with other private people, you need to negotiate how a space is going to work in terms, whether it's your neighborhood, whether it's your workplace, etc., in terms of political discussions, how loud they get, how accusatory they get, and so on. Please remember that that's just not a place where the First Amendment's going to protect you. So let me talk about what the First Amendment does protect in terms of your right to protest. Say you want to organize a protest. You want to find out if there are any local laws that affect your ability to do that. In many, many places, there are local ordinances that require a permit to have a protest. That's perfectly legal. They can have a permit ordinance. They just can't apply it to very small groups. So if you want to walk by, yourself or in a small group up to maybe 20 people, you shouldn't need a permit, but you should still check. In the city of Philadelphia, you don't need a permit if there's going to be less than 75 people unless you want to stop traffic. That's fine. But if you're going outside the city of Philadelphia to the local municipality, you should find out what their rules are. If you have any questions about whether their restrictions are constitutional, call us. That's what we do. We answer those questions constantly. And I'm not going to give you my direct line, but here's the second fastest way to get to me, is you go to ACLU PA, note the PA.org, and right on our front page, you will see off to the right something that says file a complaint. And you can file an electronic complaint. Somebody will look at it within 24 hours. And if it includes the word protest, it will be on my desk within 24 hours. So you will get a pretty quick response to any kind of questions. We're happy to answer questions. So local municipalities can impose some regulations on protests, they can require a fee to apply for a protest permit. They cannot require, many of them will say, well, yes, but you have to have $1 million insurance policy. And I'm sure all of you have the cash for $1 million insurance policy in your little organization's bank account, right? Those kinds of requirements have to be waived if you cannot afford them. There are all kinds of rules that protect your ability to get out and speak. But they only protect your ability to get out and speak on public property. And sometimes there's some confusion about what is public property, what isn't a public property. Let me just give you one quick example. Anybody ever been to a mall? Including a strip mall, right? Okay. So generally they're located next to a street. Alongside that street, there's probably a sidewalk. That's a public sidewalk. And even if the mall claims it belongs to them, it's a public sidewalk. You can protest there. My motto is, if you can walk a dog there, you can walk a sign there. So you're good. But, that sidewalk doesn't look any different than the sidewalks that lead up to the doors of the stores. Those sidewalks are not, quote unquote, public sidewalks. So these kinds of distinctions are the reasons why I really encourage you to what? Go to call us, go to aclupa.org, click on file a complaint. We are happy to talk you through the process. of figuring out what you can and can't do. Now let me talk, because there were, just for a moment, because there was mention earlier of civility, right, in our discourse. There's a lot of polarization in our political discourse. A lot of people in this room, me included, were really upset after the election. When we are really upset, we tend to express ourselves in extreme terms. We might, like Representative Bullock's children, talk about how we're going to get the president. If you say that in a public place, you might expect a call from the Secret Service. All right. Any kind of threat is not protected by the First Amendment. And the Secret Service takes threats with respect to the president and other government officials very, very seriously. Just because it's on Facebook doesn't mean it's not something they're going to take seriously. So please be careful of your tone. Profanity and insults are protected by the First Amendment, but accusations that imply someone is a criminal are not. So what I'd like to explain is, you blankety blank son of a something or other, completely protected by the First Amendment, you pedophile, not if that's actually not true, or if you have no reason to expect that that's true. So, speak strongly, express your views, your political views and your emotions, but please remember that there are things that, beyond being uncivil, can in fact get you in trouble with the law. And try to keep those things off your social media and out of your, particularly your public conversations. So I think that's most of what I want to do, sort of a 101 on First Amendment and activism. We welcome questions. And as I said, this march that's being planned is a very, very well organized affair. To the extent that there are counter-protesters, the police will keep them separate from the main march. They have a right to be there. They don't have a right to join your march, but they have a right to be on the side. And just remember these rules because, as I said, I'm really trusting that this is not going to be your last. Just so that, again, the march in 2 weeks is a very organized affair. Not only are there permits, an established route, there are going to be legal observers there who, and by the way, if you're organizing events in or around Philadelphia, the National Lawyers Guild and the Up Against the Law Legal Collective both provide legal observers for local actions, particularly if it's a smaller type action where you're concerned about some sort of irregular law enforcement response. I don't think you need to worry about that at all for 2 weeks from now, but that's really good knowledge. There are ways to anticipate and protect against interference with your rights. One of them is call us. Another is to arrange for legal observers, and again, we can help you do that if you contact us. Thank you very much for your attention.